We only have about 19 minutes left for this entire session, so I'm going to compress it very quickly. I'm going to only ask a couple of questions myself, and then I'm going to open the floor. I want to get some discussion going here on the stage. I see each of you kind of raising your fingers. You have points to make. So I'm just going to mention a couple of points that were made so far. I find it interesting. Metaphors are interesting. We think in metaphors as human beings. So we've got a couple of interesting metaphors on the table here now. One is the metaphor, we heard it from Hubert Védrine, of the asteroid that is coming our way that is going to hit Europe in the form of Trump, and that Europe, together with Canada, are terribly unprepared for what is about to happen. We also have the metaphor of the rhino, which I like very much. I'm very fond of rhinos. But it wasn't entirely clear to me whether the rhino was Trump or Russia.
Deal.
Sorry?
The deal is the rhino.
Deal.
The deal that is the rhino.
In any case, those are two things to keep in mind. I was intrigued by the comment that you made, Norbert, regarding the need for Russia to fail, basically, for this to be a failure for Russia. Russia cannot be allowed to succeed. I want to talk about that, I want to get your reflections on that notion in the context of Trump's promise to end the war very quickly. You know, he's going into office with ending the war being one of his...
On day one.
On day one,
yeah.
Yes. I mean, we can kind of dial back some of the bombast, but he will certainly be putting, that'll be one of his main priorities. So many are wondering how that's going to happen, and if the notion that territory is not the most important thing, that sovereignty is the most important thing, I find that very interesting. I'm not sure how those things fit together, but I want to get a response from Védrine, because he had you have lots of interesting things to say about this whole question of defense and whether Europe is going to be ready to actually do what it needs to do to stand up for its defense, and that is being put into question. The question that I'm wondering about is how is Trump going to end that war so quickly, and if Europe is going to be forced to give Ukraine the security guarantees because the US is simply not going to do it, it's going to be too preoccupied with Asia, let's say. How is that going to happen? Who wishes to reflect on that? Okay, Zaki, we can start with you. Just briefly, but please, we only have 6 minutes. Let's try to keep it quick.
There is a kind of fascination in Europe vis-à-vis Trump, and we tend to think that he will achieve what he said he will achieve. But let's look at what he achieved during his first mandate, even as someone who's trying to make deals. And virtually, he was not terribly successful as a deal maker. I just remind to this audience that during the Trump administration, the number of American soldiers in Europe has increased during his mandate. It has increased. And I agree with you. The fact that he claims that he's going to find a solution is something. The other thing is how he will do it. And he has to be very cautious, because if he invests politically a lot on Ukraine from the beginning, and if he doesn't achieve his goals, it would be a failure. Third, you have what in the United States, what you call the establishment. The establishment. And the establishment plays a role, including the Pentagon. I mean, he can bypass the Pentagon, but that's not so easy. During his first mandate, he wanted to withdraw American troops in Syria, and he was prevented doing it by the Pentagon. So we need to be cautious. What is sure is that he's not going to vote a new supplemental. But I think that the Biden administration was not going to do it anyway. So I don't think that the difference is going to be huge. We need to be cautious.
Okay. Hubert Védrine.
Alors, deux remarques. D'abord, je pense que Trump va essayer de geler qui va donc être obligé de dissuader en même temps, sinon il s'affaiblit trop. Et moi, je n'écarte pas l'hypothèse qu'il promette à Poutine la levée des sanctions. C'est dans sa nature, en fait. Et donc, ça placerait les Européens dans une situation extrêmement difficile à gérer, parmi d'autres. Et alors, je redis, comme tout à l'heure, que le point le plus compliqué entre nous, c'est si Trump, il ne peut pas sortir de l'OTAN, mais enfin, il peut donner très peu de garanties américaines, et qu'il dit c'est aux Européens de donner les garanties. Et là, on retombe dans une confusion entre qu'est-ce qui est européen, qu'est-ce qui est OTAN. Et il n'y a pas de structure des alliés européens de l'OTAN. On serait peut-être obligé d'inventer le pôle européen dans l'Alliance Atlantique. Et là, on tombera sur des questions qu'on n'a jamais traitées avant, parce que la question ne se posait pas. C'est qui décide? Qui décide? On n'est pas simplement dans l'industrie d'armement. On n'est pas simplement dans les déclarations. On est dans la guerre et la paix. Donc il faut des décisions politiques d'une légitimité totale. Et on aurait intérêt à réfléchir à ça. On risque dans les... Deuxième remarque très rapide, je pense qu'on ne devrait pas oublier une structure qui a été réinventée par Draghi, l'État, Macron et Scholz, qui est la communauté politique européenne. Je sais que personne n'y croit pour le moment, que ça paraît secondaire, les médias s'en occupent pas, mais c'est le seul rendez-vous où il y a tous les Européens et que les Européens. Bon, ça ne va pas remplacer l'Alliance, mais comme on va avoir des questions à décider entre Européens plus difficiles que depuis 70 ans, il ne faut pas négliger cette instance. Dernier point, vous avez parlé de la perspective à donner à l'Ukraine, que c'est totalement décourageant et dangereux s'il n'y a pas de vraie perspective, l'erreur des Balkans. Il y a un Français qui est M. Bourlange, qui présidait la commission des affaires étrangères française, et qui avait dit il y a quelque temps, s'il y a un blocage dans les décisions européennes, s'il faut de l'unanimité, il faudrait mettre en avant une perspective par étapes. L'adhésion étant l'aboutissement de l'étape, et ne pas tout subordonner au point d'arrivée. Donc les pays qui seraient dans le processus européen, qu'on veut consolider, pour ne pas les désespérer, pour ne pas donner d'arguments aux autres, que ce soit les Russes ou les autres, donc une entrée par étapes dans les différents programmes. Alors ça n'a pas été complètement concrétisé, mais voilà deux idées dont je pense qu'il ne faut pas les oublier. Communauté politique européenne et entrée par étapes.
We have about 11 minutes left. I've developed all sorts of really interesting questions, of course, to put to each of you. But before I open the floor to the audience, I would like to give each of you an opportunity to provide further input if you wish. You've been sitting here next to me very, very quietly and calmly, Yann, but perhaps you wish to reflect from your perspective on what we've just been talking about in terms of security and what the implications are for the private sector, if nothing else.
And I'm going to be a naive guy here since I'm not a foreign policy expert, but my question would be around the effectiveness of NATO, and especially in regards to Article 5, and how, which has never been activated, and
yes, once.
How that? Sorry,
But it had been activated once
once,
in Afghanistan.
9/11.
and how effective it would be, even if Ukraine were to join NATO. You know, so that's more.
Now, the purpose of Article 5 is to exist in order not to be activated.
Absolutely.
So it's deterrence.
Exactly.
And deterrence lives from its credibility. And this is, for the first time, I would say, a real danger, even for the credibility of NATO, if there were this deal, if the leading power of NATO was invented to provide and organize European security. This is why NATO exists, European security. If we now were to witness and experience that the leading power of NATO were to cut a deal with the adversary of Europe at the expense of European security, Article 5 would remain in place, but nevertheless, it would fundamentally damage the credibility of NATO. It would split NATO because the Central and Eastern Europeans would say, As long as it was about the security of Western Germany and the West, NATO was there, Article 5 was credible. Now it's only about us, the Central and Eastern Europeans, and you let us down. So NATO would not be the same after that deal as it was during the Cold War.
I know you would like to say something. Go ahead.
A bit like Ukraine is not a member, so Article 5 doesn't cover Ukraine. I don't think that Central and Eastern European members of NATO would have such a strong
but they see the security of Ukraine as an imminent threat to their own national security.
But that's not. But the Article 5 is not about imminent threats. Article 5 is about actually attacks. If a member is attacked, I think we generally, as Europeans, because I consider myself a European, despite the fact that I'm not from a country that is in the European Union. I think we should spend, in my opinion, more energy talking to the other side.
The other side being?
You call it adversary, but they're very much part of the future security situation, be it a catastrophe or not a catastrophe in our continent, right?
You're referring to
because
Russia.
What you said, yeah,
right?
I'm talking about Russia.
Yeah.
Because you said, like, what we must not do is to let a pause be just like a holdout for another Putin's invasion so that he can replenish the stocks, prepare, and then invade again. Well, do you believe that this is exactly what they think about the West and Ukraine? And they even quote Madame Merkel when she said, well, Minsk was actually just buying time for Ukraine, the Minsk agreement buying time for Ukraine so that Ukraine can rearm and the like. So the Russians are saying, well, we don't want to hold out so that they can just like rearm them now that Europe is going to bring up this defense spending and the like. So we're talking past each other in Europe. I think we should be talking more to each other. And this is the last thing that I'm going to say. I recently organized a debate between people who have very, very different views. One was Ian Bremmer, and the other one was Sergei Karaganov. So they sat and they talked. They viscerally disagreed about certain things, but then they came up to an understanding that they agree on 90% of things.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there. We're gonna